On April 5th, 2022, the strongest tornado in the United States that year carved through Bryan County, Georgia, with winds reaching 185 miles per hour. This is the story of how a 15-minute storm killed one person, injured 12 others, and became only the 11th EF4 tornado in Georgia since 1950. What makes this tornado stand out is not just its raw power, though that alone would deserve attention. Georgia had just experienced an EF4 tornado the previous year in Noonan, and that sequence made the state the first to record F4 or EF4 tornadoes in consecutive years since modern record-keeping began in 1950. The Pembroke-Black Creek tornado forced an entire county to confront uncomfortable questions about warning systems, preparedness, and what happens when a violent tornado strikes a small rural community that was not expecting one. Over the next 40 minutes, we are going to examine this event from multiple angles, tracing the meteorological conditions that produce such an intense tornado, following its path from touchdown to dissipation, hearing from survivors in their own words, and exploring the aftermath, both the immediate devastation and the years-long recovery that followed. But first, we need to understand where this tornado struck and why that geography matters. Bryan County sits in coastal Georgia, approximately 35 miles west of Savannah, and it has a peculiar geographic feature that becomes relevant to our story. Fort Stewart, military reservation, completely divides the county, meaning residents must actually leave Bryan County and travel on public roads to get from the northern section to the southern section. Pembroke serves as the county seat, a small town of about 2,500 people founded in 1892 as a railroad town. About 9 miles northeast along U.S. Route 280 lies Black Creek, an unincorporated community of roughly 769 residents that is home to the Black Creek Golf Course and the Parkplace subdivision, locations that would soon become the focal point of destruction. By 2020, Bryan County had grown to nearly 45,000 residents after experiencing rapid expansion in recent decades as people moved into the greater Savannah metropolitan area. Despite this growth, the communities of Pembroke and Black Creek retained their small-town, rural character. This setting shaped both how the tornado impacted the area and how the community responded. These were not densely packed urban neighborhoods with robust infrastructure and immediate access to resources. This was rural Georgia, with scattered homes, wooded areas, mobile home parks, and small-town government buildings that served as the backbone of civic life. Now let's turn to the weather conditions that made this tornado possible. April 5th, 2022 was not an isolated severe weather day. It was part of a larger outbreak that spanned April 4th to 7th, and that sequence ultimately produced over 80 tornadoes across Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida. On April 5th alone, somewhere between 38 and 45 tornadoes touched down across the affected region. The Storm Prediction Center had been tracking this threat for days and issued an enhanced risk, Level 3 of 5, for the Bryan County area, signaling that severe weather carried real potential. This was not a surprise event that caught forecasters off guard, because the atmospheric ingredients were clearly visible to meteorologists well in advance. Those ingredients included mixed layer CAPE values from 1,500 to 2,000 joules per kilogram, a measure of atmospheric instability that indicates energy available for thunderstorm development. Dew points had climbed into the mid-60s degrees Fahrenheit, providing ample moisture. Storm relative helicity exceeded 300 meters squared per second squared, which measures the rotating potential within the atmosphere. Strong wind shear accompanied a quasi-linear convective system, essentially a squall line, as it moved through the region. What happened that afternoon followed a pattern severe weather researchers have documented repeatedly. Discrete supercells formed ahead of the main squall line, and one of these supercells produced the Pembroke-Black Creek tornado. The tornado initially displayed a multi-vortex structure that lacked a visible condensation funnel, And that detail matters. When we think of tornadoes, we typically picture that classic funnel cloud extending from storm to ground. But not all tornadoes look like that, especially in their early stages. A multi-vortex tornado, without a visible condensation funnel, can be extraordinarily difficult to spot visually, even for trained observers. And then, something changed. The tornado rapidly intensified, transforming from that harder to see multi-vortex structure into a massive wedge tornado at peak strength. A wedge tornado is one where the width of the funnel at ground level equals or exceeds the distance from the ground to the cloud base, making them among the most visually striking and most dangerous tornado configurations. This rapid intensification proved critical in determining the damage pattern we will examine shortly. At 5:18 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on April 5th, 2022, the tornado touched down south of Bacontown Road, southwest of Pembroke. The National Weather Service recorded the coordinates as 32.1202 degrees, north latitude, and 81.6561 degrees west longitude. Within 2 minutes, the tornado had entered downtown Pembroke along College Street and State Route 67, and it was bearing down on the Bryan County Courthouse. The courthouse is not just any building. Listed on the National Register of Historic Places, the structure represented the center of county government and civic identity. The tornado tore the roof off. Adjacent to the courthouse, the Bryan County Jail, the Bryan County Administrative Complex, and the Bryan County Planning and Zoning Office sustained damage. At this point in its path, the tornado was producing damage consistent with EF2 on the enhanced Fujita scale, with winds between 111 and 135 miles per hour. Destructive, certainly, but not yet at its peak. Between 5:20 p.m. and 5:25 p.m., the tornado crossed through rural, wooded areas of Bryan County. Structures on CC Road and Stubbs Farm Road sustained damage, but the tornado was traversing less densely populated terrain during this stretch. And then came the critical minutes between 5:26 and 5:30 p.m. EF4 intensity arrived as the tornado struck the Parkplace subdivision and George D. Hendricks Park. This is where we need to talk about what EF4 damage actually looks like, because the survey evidence tells a stark story. National Weather Service surveyors documented foundation bolts, the bolts that anchor a home's frame to its concrete foundation, bent by the force of the wind. Think about what that means. Steel bolts embedded in concrete, designed to keep a house attached to its foundation in severe weather, and the wind bent them. 2 homes in the Parkplace subdivision were swept away, leaving only their bare concrete slab foundations. Everything else, the walls, roof, furniture, possessions, was gone, scattered across the landscape. County Chairman Carter Enfinger reported that personal belongings from victims turned up in the next county over. Well-built, anchor-bolted homes were completely leveled. At Hendricks Park, concrete light poles, not wooden utility poles but concrete, snapped at their base. The recreation center sustained heavy damage. The football field showed turf damage, which surveyors use as a damage indicator because it takes tremendous wind force to physically tear up turf. Based on this damage evidence, the National Weather Service estimated peak winds of 185 miles per hour, placing the tornado in the mid-range of the EF4 category, which spans from 166 to 200 miles per hour. The initial assessment on April 6th classified the tornado as at least EF3, but that changed on April 15th. Following extensive ground surveys and analysis of all damage indicators, the National Weather Service officially upgraded the rating to EF4. At approximately 5:31 p.m., the tornado struck the Homestead Drive mobile home park. Belinda Thompson was 66 years old, a retired practical nurse from Florida, a member of Compassion Christian Church in Savannah. and the Christian Motorcycle Association. A great-grandmother living her best years of retirement, she spent her days caring for her great-grandson and enjoying life with her husband Calvin. The tornado destroyed their mobile home. Bryan County Coroner Bill Cox described the scene. It was just completely ripped to pieces. It's like it exploded. Calvin Thompson was injured and hospitalized, but he survived. His wife did not. In an interview with WSAV, Calvin Thompson spoke about his loss. He said, "I don't know how I lived through it, but my wife didn't. I'm going to miss her a whole lot. She was my everything. We just left the funeral home and I got to see my baby once more, before all this goes over. And it was tough. I ain't going to lie to you." At the Homestead Drive location, surveyors documented EF3 damage, with winds between 136 and 165 miles per hour. The tornado had weakened slightly from its peak at Parkplace, but remained violent enough to destroy a mobile home and take a human life. At 5:32 p.m., the tornado crossed Interstate 16 at the U.S. Highway 280 exit. Gage Moore, 23 years old, was driving on the interstate when it happened. He later described the experience to CBS News. He said, "Everybody started slamming on brakes all around me. I could actually feel my truck shaking back and forth and hear the roar of it passing by." Video captured the crossing, one of several pieces of documentation that would help surveyors understand the tornado's behavior. At 5:33 p.m., 1 mile east-southeast of Blychton, at coordinates 32.1854 degrees north and 81.4225 degrees west, the tornado dissipated. 15 minutes from touchdown to dissipation. A path length of 14.5113 miles. Maximum width of 1,300 yards, approximately 3/4 of a mile. Governor Brian Kemp, who toured the damage the following day, made an observation that puts those 15 minutes in perspective. He said it was fortunate the twister did not stay on the ground very long, or the damage and loss of life would likely have been much worse. The statistics tell part of the story, with 1 fatality and 12 injuries. Numbers do not capture what it was like to experience those 15 minutes. Harry Bostick Sr. lived through the tornado and then immediately faced a parent's worst fear because his son was trapped in a collapsed home. He ran across the field. As he reached a standing wall, he knocked on the wall and got no answer. He called out for his family, asking if they were okay. Suddenly, he saw a small tip of a finger, and his son said that he was right there. His son survived. Ashley Jackson was trapped when a wall collapsed on her family. She said they heard a whistling sound. Her father was in his room. They heard the noise and ran toward his room, and the wall and everything fell on them. The whistling was the first warning for them. Jessie Jones lived in the Parkplace subdivision at the tornado's point of peak intensity. Returning to her property, she said it was devastating to look around and see that the house that had been across the street was in her driveway, and her garage was in her kitchen. Marley Hassani lived near the courthouse. She described lots of noise, tree branches hitting the house, and debris flying by. It sounded like a train coming through, and she said it was scary as anything. The comparison to a train is one of the most common descriptions tornado survivors use. The sound of a tornado, a combination of wind, debris impacts, and atmospheric pressure changes, creates an auditory experience that many people struggle to describe in any other way. The moment the tornado dissipated at 5:33 p.m., the 911 center was, in the words of officials, bombarded with calls. Bryan County Emergency Management Director and Fire Chief Freddie Howell coordinated the initial response, and by approximately 11 p.m. that night, about 5.5 hours after the tornado, crews had completed an initial search of all damaged structures. Overnight operations continued with local search efforts, and no additional injuries turned up beyond the 12 already documented. The American Red Cross opened a shelter at Lanier Primary School, while a curfew was imposed in the affected areas to prevent looting and ensure safety during rescue and recovery operations. Within the first 24 hours, $58,000 in donations poured into the United Way of the Coastal Empire. The outpouring of community support came immediately and in force. The following day, April 6th, Governor Brian Kemp arrived to tour the damage by helicopter. After walking through the devastation on the ground, he observed that it was literally total devastation for some homes. He said they walked through a house where there was no wood left on the house, nothing but a foundation, with a water heater sitting there. The scene was devastation. Kemp declared a state of emergency for the affected area. Emergency was the designation put in place to speed help and resources. County Chairman Carter Enfinger also declared a local state of emergency and described the scope of the destruction. He said about 13 or 14 homes got destroyed in that one community next to the park. And throughout the county administration building and the county courthouse suffered extensive damage too. Much was destroyed. According to the Georgia Emergency Management Agency, at least 18 homes were destroyed, and at least 10 more sustained major damage. These numbers represent total losses and severe damage, not the broader count of properties that suffered lesser impacts. 18 homes were confirmed destroyed. $17 million. That was the total of the insurance claims, the largest county insurance claim in Bryan County history. The claim went through the Association of County Commissioners of Georgia, and it stood as the largest county insurance claim in Georgia state history. $17 million in insured claims. That $17 million figure represented insured losses. The full economic impact, including uninsured losses, displacement costs, lost productivity, and infrastructure repair, would have run higher. Insured is the key qualifier for that figure. Georgia Baptist Disaster Relief deployed teams while God's Pit Crew, a Virginia-based volunteer organization, sent assistance. Multiple neighboring counties provided mutual aid. Mutual aid flowed in from around the region, but one local response stood out for its scale and dedication. The Bryan County Shrine Club, led by President Gil Newell, contributed over 3,000 volunteer hours in less than 2 weeks and prepared and served 7,100 meals to displaced residents and first responders. 90% of those meals came from scratch, not catered, not pre-packaged, but prepared by volunteers in a community kitchen for their neighbors who had lost everything. 7,100 meals were served. As the immediate crisis stabilized and recovery began, attention turned to a difficult question. Could better warning systems have made a difference? Bryan County, at the time of the tornado, had no outdoor warning sirens. Emergency Management Chief Freddie Howell had previously defended this approach, citing studies that suggested outdoor sirens were not the most effective method of warning populations about severe weather. The county relied on code red notifications, an automated calling and texting system, NOAA weather radios, and cell phone alerts through the wireless emergency alert system. The Storm Prediction Center had issued an enhanced risk several days in advance, and the atmospheric conditions were well forecasted. The question was not whether the threat was identified, because it clearly was. The question was how effectively that information reached residents in the minutes before the tornado struck their specific location. The argument for outdoor sirens goes like this. Not everyone checks their phone constantly. Not everyone owns a NOAA weather radio. Not everyone opts into code red notifications. An outdoor siren is audible to anyone within range, regardless of what they are doing or what technology they own. It serves as a last line of defense, a wake-up call that something is immediately, urgently wrong. The argument against outdoor sirens involves cost, maintenance, and effectiveness. Sirens can be expensive to install and require ongoing maintenance. Their sound does not penetrate well into buildings, particularly well-insulated modern construction. And they require people to know what to do when they hear one, because hearing an alarm does not automatically translate to taking protective action. After April 5th, 2022, the theoretical debate became personal for Bryan County residents. They experienced a violent tornado. A woman died. The question of whether sirens might have given even a few more seconds of warning became emotionally charged. The political process took time. 2 years passed before Bryan County, in July 2024, approved the installation of 15 emergency warning sirens, with 12 placed in North Bryan and 3 in South Bryan. The cost exceeded $325,000, funded through a GEMA grant. The tornado had forced a policy change that years of theoretical discussion had not accomplished. When we talk about tornado damage, we naturally focus on homes because that is where people live and where the human impact is most acute. The Pembroke-Black Creek tornado also destroyed critical community infrastructure that had consequences extending far beyond individual families. The Curtis V. Cooper Primary Care Clinic was completely destroyed. This was Pembroke's only affordable medical facility serving low-income residents, people who could not afford health insurance but earned too much to qualify for Medicaid. For this population, the clinic's destruction did not just mean inconvenience. It meant losing access to basic health care. Severe damage struck the Black Creek Golf Course clubhouse, while the cart barn was destroyed entirely. For a rural community, a golf course represents more than recreation. It often serves as a social gathering point, an employer, and a component of local identity. George D. Hendricks Park sustained heavy damage to the recreation center, the athletic fields, and the infrastructure that supported youth sports and community activities. The Bryan County Courthouse, a historic building on the National Register of Historic Places, lost its roof and sustained major damage. For a county seat, the courthouse represents governmental continuity and civic identity. Commissioner Noah Covington later reflected that the tornado's timing was particularly fortunate despite the devastation. He said it was the worst tornado in the nation in 2022, and that nobody was expecting this. There was supposed to be baseball practice that day. There were people at the park working, things going on, and it was just a normal thunderstorm until the tornado hit. The park was in use that day. Had the tornado struck at a slightly different time, during active baseball practice with children and families present, the casualty count could have been catastrophic. Recovery from a violent tornado isn't measured in weeks or months. It's measured in years. In May 2022, partial fields at Hendricks Park reopened, marking the first milestone in a long reconstruction process. By January 2023, roofing and framing work on the county administrative building reached completion. On April 22, 2023, just over a year after the tornado, Hendricks Park held an opening day celebration that served as an informal community commemoration, a marker of progress, and a signal that normalcy was returning. Not everything recovered on that timeline. The Curtis V. Cooper Primary Care Clinic, the affordable medical facility that was destroyed, faced ongoing challenges finding a new permanent home. The healthcare gap the tornado created persisted. The historic courthouse required specific preservation-compliant materials that proved difficult to source, and county officials reported supply chain delays of up to 48 months for certain materials. The courthouse was expected to reopen in August 2024, though the final status of that timeline could not be independently confirmed as of the research date. In the Parkplace subdivision, ground zero for EF4 damage, 12 new homes were under construction as of April 2023. But construction moves slowly when you are rebuilding from bare foundations. Chairman Carter Infinger acknowledged that the insurance-funded recovery process was sometimes a little slower than we would like. What's worth noting is that this was characterized as an insurance-funded rebuild rather than a federally declared disaster. No FEMA federal disaster declaration was confirmed for this specific event, which meant the recovery depended heavily on insurance payouts and state resources, rather than federal emergency funding. Nearly 4 years after the tornado, in January 2026, the Hendricks Park Gymnasium reopened. The new facility is substantial, featuring 10,500 square feet of gym space, seating for 194 spectators, and multiple support rooms, representing a $4.7 million investment in the community's future. All of the Hendricks Park athletic fields, walking trails, and playgrounds have been rebuilt. The Bryan County Administrative Building has been repaired. The Bryan County Jail Complex is fully operational. The 15 sirens that were approved in July 2024 represent the most significant policy change to emerge from the tornado. Whether they will make a difference in a future severe weather event remains to be seen, but their installation addresses the vulnerability that April 5th, 2022 exposed. Local media provided anniversary coverage at the 1-year mark in April 2023 and the 2-year mark in April 2024. No formal memorial or monument has been publicly reported, but the Hendricks Park opening day celebration and the ongoing recovery milestones have served as informal commemorations. The community has largely rebuilt, but largely is not completely. Some facilities remained works in progress as of the most recent available information, and some residents may never fully recover economically or emotionally from what they lost. Let's step back and consider what the Pembroke-Black Creek tornado represents in the broader context of Georgia's tornado history and national severe weather patterns. EF4 tornadoes are rare, representing the second highest category on the enhanced Fujita scale, with only EF5 tornadoes, those with winds exceeding 200 miles per hour, being more intense. Only 11 EF4 tornadoes have touched down in Georgia since 1950, and the Pembroke-Black Creek tornado was one of them. Prior to 2021, Georgia had experienced EF4 tornadoes only sporadically. In March 2021, an EF4 tornado struck Noonan, Georgia. Just over a year later, the Pembroke-Black Creek tornado struck. That sequence made Georgia the first state to record F4 or EF4 tornadoes in consecutive years since modern tornado record keeping began in 1950. Whether this represents statistical noise, changing climate patterns, or improved damage survey methods, detecting tornadoes that might previously have been rated lower is a question researchers continue to study. The strongest tornado anywhere in the United States in 2022 was the Pembroke-Black Creek tornado. It surpassed the Winterset, Iowa EF4 from March 5th, 2022, which had peak winds of 170 miles per hour. For a state not typically associated with the most violent tornadoes, a distinction that usually goes to tornado alley states like Oklahoma, Kansas, and Texas, Georgia had experienced back-to-back years of EF4 tornado activity. That was a stark reminder that violent tornadoes can and do occur across the southeastern United States, even in areas where residents might not expect them. Every tornado teaches lessons if we are willing to learn them, and the Pembroke-Black Creek tornado offers several. First, forecasting worked. The Storm Prediction Center identified the threat days in advance. The enhanced risk was issued, and the atmospheric conditions were well understood. The science of predicting severe weather environments has improved dramatically over the decades, and April 5th, 2022 demonstrated that capability. Forecasting an environment conducive to tornadoes is different from forecasting exactly where and when a specific tornado will touch down. That remains extraordinarily difficult. The Pembroke-Black Creek tornado's initial multivortex structure lacked a visible condensation funnel, and that made it harder to identify visually. Radar signatures can help, but there is still a gap between knowing tornadoes are likely in a region this afternoon and knowing a tornado will strike a specific neighborhood at 5:26 p.m. Second, the warning system debate matters. Bryan County did not have outdoor sirens, and after the tornado, they decided to install them. Whether sirens would have saved Belinda Thompson's life is unknowable, but the community decided that having an additional warning mechanism was worth the investment. The tornado changed the policy calculus. Third, rural communities face distinct challenges. The scattered population, the reliance on small-town government infrastructure, and the limited redundancy in critical services like healthcare all shaped both the impact and the recovery in Bryan County. When the only affordable medical clinic in town is destroyed, there is no nearby alternative. When the county courthouse loses its roof, it affects governmental functions that the entire county depends on. Fourth, community resilience is real, but it takes time. The volunteer response, with over 3,000 hours of work and 7,100 meals served, demonstrated what neighbors helping neighbors looks like in practice. The long recovery timelines, supply chain challenges, and ongoing needs show that even with strong community bonds, rebuilding from a violent tornado is a multi-year process. Fifth, historical significance does not protect you. The Bryan County Courthouse was on the National Register of Historic Places. The tornado did not care. Preservation-compliant reconstruction took longer and cost more because of the building's historic status. At 5:18 p.m. on April 5th, 2022, a tornado touched down southwest of Pembroke, Georgia. 15 minutes later, at 5:33 p.m., it dissipated 1 mile southeast of Bridgeton. In those 15 minutes, the tornado traveled 14.5113 miles and reached maximum winds of 185 miles per hour. Belinda Thompson died, and 12 other people were injured. At least 18 homes were destroyed, while many more sustained damage. $17 million in insured losses made the largest insurance claim in Bryan County history. It was the strongest tornado in the United States in 2022, and only the 11th EF4 tornado in Georgia since 1950. Nearly 4 years later, the community has largely rebuilt. The Hendricks Park Gymnasium reopened in January 2026. Emergency warning sirens have been approved and funded. The visible scars have mostly healed. Calvin Thompson still grieves his wife. Families who lost everything have had to restart their lives. A community that did not expect a violent tornado now knows what one looks like. The meteorological conditions that produced the Pembroke-Black Creek tornado will occur again somewhere. The same atmospheric ingredients, instability, moisture, and wind shear combine regularly across the United States during severe weather seasons. The question is not whether another violent tornado will strike a rural community that is not expecting one. The question is when, and whether the lessons from April 5th, 2022 will make a difference. Tornadoes do not discriminate by geography or preparation. They follow the physics of the atmosphere, touching down where the conditions align, and dissipating when those conditions change. What humans can control is how we prepare, how we warn, and how we respond. Bryan County learned those lessons the hard way. Their experience, the 15 minutes of terror, the months of recovery, the years of rebuilding, stands as a case study in what a violent tornado does to a small community and what it takes to come back. The Pembroke-Black Creek tornado is now part of Georgia's severe weather history, but more importantly, it is part of the lived experience of the people who survived it, the families who lost loved ones, and the community that had to rebuild. Their story does not end with the tornado's dissipation at 5:33 p.m. It continues in every rebuilt home, every installed warning siren, and every anniversary that passes. That is the full story of the April 5th, 2022 Pembroke-Black Creek tornado, the strongest tornado in America that year, the lives it changed, and the community that survived it.